and monitor, just to monitor for chat in case there's any questions. The first time we're doing this, don't know if there's going to be anybody out there listening. Let's see. In fact, yeah, it'll show us a people count right up here in the top, and it doesn't have that yet. So you're there now. Okay. That should update to show, but I'll let you monitor that, and I will dive in. You've all seen this for the last 15 minutes. Yeah. That's what we're about. We enjoy working in Ionic. Let me see. Let's go. Here we go. So a little more intro about me. I grew up in Silicon Valley, went to high school, graduated with programming honors. And just to keep it real, I also had a 2.5 GPA in high school. But they still gave me the honors. I don't know how that worked. I was QA engineer at Novell with Tim, and worked with Brett too. And then I've been, since 2000, I've been with Exactware, which is bought by Verisk. So you'll hear both names around here. I've been there, and then done a lot of training, conferences, and things in UI and UX. I really enjoy user experience and design. I'm not much of a graphic artist, so I don't have that side of it, but I like to take a design or a finished product like Exactware, and I would say, hey, let's change this and do this way and simplify. Anyways, I helped steer a lot of the UI and UX on our analytics product. And there I specialize a lot in accessibility, internationalization, and usability. I managed 2 native projects for like 2 years. We got it up and going, and then we migrated it to a PWA. So we still, while we built those apps, we built out an API on the back end, and so then we just threw in an Ionic PWA for the front end, hit the same APIs, and redid that because we had one programmer in Java back then. There wasn't Kotlin. And one programmer in Objective-C. And anyways, we pulled them into the web projects and switched over to Ionic. It's just been a PWA ever since. We haven't had a need to go into the app stores with that product. I'm part-time instructor here. I recently became an Ionic developer expert. And then, yeah, husband, dad, all those things. Let's see. So what is Ionic? Yes, high level. Most of you know this already, but it's a whole set of tools to help you make it easier to build apps and get them into the App Store. Now, specifically, I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. I've got links. The last slide has links for everything I'm presenting, so you don't need to. And the slides are also available. I posted the link to the slides on slides.com in the meetup. What do they call it? It's the actual meetup chat, because there's comments and then there's chat. And I could even show you that here. Let me see. If you go to today's meetup, there's an event chat right here. It's kind of small, but I posted the slides there in the meetup. And the chat. So these slides are all available. So first of all, I've got some bullet points here, what Ionic is, the different moving parts. I probably left something out. So when we get to the end, raise your hand if there's something else you want to call out. But it's a CLI. So if you've done any web stuff with NPM tools, that installs the Ionic CLI. It's like installing the Angular CLI or the React CLI. It installs it locally so that you can run it and create projects and add components and pages and all that. So it's similar to that. That's how you install it, first half, and then after the ampersands, Ionic start. That's how you fire up a project, and then it asks you a bunch of questions. You want Vue, Angular, React, Do you want, let me see. What's the other? Oh, ask for a name. Ask for the starter. They have different starters, and we'll show you some of those later. But that walks you all through it. So Ionic is a CLI. It's a UI toolkit, and it's really magical the way they built it and put it together. If you lay it out right, just like any UI framework, like material design or something else, if you don't lay it out correctly, or you don't nest your components in the right order, if your structure's not well, it doesn't quite work right. Same with Ionic. If you build it right, follow their examples. They've added a lot of things like the animated transitions and just helper classes for errors on your inputs and other things. But yeah, if you lay out your project, all the elements. To NX? NX is a broader tool that will let you put an Ionic project into it. So it's a bigger tool for managing multiple projects or microservices. Do micro front ends?
Primarily like
there we go.
big monorepo, multiple projects. So if you want to share a component library, like we use NX to share our component library with 3 different front end apps. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just pulls them all into the same code base, and it has a bunch of tools to help manage builds and shared resources and those kind of things. So that's about, the question was about NX. I'll just repeat that for online, if anybody's out there. So another magic thing about it is it supports Android and Apple UI. So you know how there's a material design and then there's the Apple guidelines, and if you write your code in Ionic, you get both. I mean, if here in the browser, I'll show you a project a little later, and in Chrome, you can choose which device you want to emulate. If I emulate an iPhone and refresh the page, boom, it'll come up following the Apple guidelines. And then if I switch it back, the default is material. So if I don't have the emulator running, it's going to just run material. But so it supports both. And so you get the look and feel of each platform with one code base, even as a PWA. So I've got a couple PWAs out there. They're easy, right? They're easy to deploy, put out there. And if someone's running on iPhone, someone's running on Android, one's going to look material, and one's going to look like Apple guidelines. And of course, you can deviate too. If you can customize your Ionic widgets and components to a custom look and feel, make it the same across both platforms. It's always an option. Mostly it's emulated. It runs in a web browser, but there's a toolkit and bridges that lets you get down to the hardware. We'll get there in a minute. And then there's CSS helper classes. So a whole bunch of things that you're used to seeing with Bootstrap and other things. That just let you, align right or float or, setting up your grid, laying that out small. It's a full set of CSS helper classes included. And then a theme generator. They have a page where you can pick your primary, secondary, warning colors, everything else, just the way you want it for your brand and your colors, and then export that, just copy and then paste it into your theme in the Ionic project, and it's just up and running. Again, you got to follow their best practices. Whenever you color something, you set color to primary or color to secondary as much as you can, and then you get that ease of editing the theme. Yep.
Does it support, like, if you kind of want to have dark or light theme that the user can select?
Yeah. That's the dark mode right here on the end. Hadn't quite got there, but yeah, automatically, if they switch their device to dark mode, or if they're running in dark mode, it will be dark mode. And then you can also build your own controls to turn it on and off if you want as well. But it comes just in a default project that you create with the command line. It comes with it. So really slick. They also have an icon library with, and I've got a couple, these arrows here remind me, and I've already forgotten. I jumped past this one, but I've got tabs open so we could see like and again, all these links to the component reference and everything is at the end of the slides. But you can see all the nice widgets they have here in the middle on the main page. It has all these little cards demoing some of them. On the left is a full list. You could browse alphabetically and get to where you need. Grab the code, paste it in your project, and run with it. And then the second tab is the icons. So you come in here, it's got a full set of icons. And I want to make sure and point out that there's 3 different styles: outline, filled, and sharp. So compare, let me see, boom. Yeah, you just see a little bit of a change there. It's not big, but it's to match up with some of the standards that are out there. So great icon library, and you can use it or not. You can use font, awesome. You can bring that in. You can use material icons, pull that in instead. All these layers are all options but if you use the CLI and you create a project, you're going to get the icon flavor. You're going to get the ion icons, and the whole UI toolkit and everything. Now, capacitor, we're running in a web view, but when you package it up as a native app and submit it to the app stores, that whole shell is a capacitor shell. And then there's a whole bunch of plugins that you can tap into. So let's jump to the plugin page here. Let me zoom in a little bit. But yeah, you go down the left side here, APIs. Those are all the plugins for a native action sheet. I mean, Ionic has its own action sheet. You can do it full web. You're fine. But for some reason, you need a native action sheet. You use that plugin, and it has examples on how to use it. Most popular plugin is Camera. All the tutorials go through that. And but just for an example, let's click on Camera and show you what you do. So into your project, you need to add the Camera plugin. So you install that into your project, and then this cap sync, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's a capacitor. Cap is for capacitor. And then it tells you what you need to do for iOS and Android. That's permissions, right? If you're building a mobile device that wants to use your camera, you get a prompt. So you got to set up permissions in your app that you're, just to say, hey, this app is going to request the camera. And so you got to configure that. So that's how to do that. But the actual code for it down here, really simple. You import, like here's this, in this example, the camera result type. You take the picture. This right here is what actually calls the plugin, which has the plugin is a native piece of code, and it's accessing the camera, giving you full camera. And there is a difference. If you pull up a website and you're doing stuff with the camera, there's a difference between the features that are available in the browser versus on the device itself. And so you're going to get more features and higher quality usually when you go to the device using capacitor compared to using the browser. All right, and that tells you how to use it there. And then if you have an image on your page, you just set the source, the image URL, and boom, the picture appears on the page. And so that's capacitor. Again, I'm just touching high level on what all the working pieces are.
You go to like devices or network, like you want to get Bluetooth in an IoT device to set it up to tie it in.
So you want your app to be able to use Bluetooth. Yeah. Yeah. Any of those features you want to use with the networking and Bluetooth, yeah, you'll add the plugin and I've seen some talk about IoT specifically on the Discord channels, but I don't know where to go to do that.
So there's like a specific capacity plugin.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have an app that's going to be consuming an API somewhere, which most of them do, then you'll want to install the HTTP plugin. It just gives you better, what's it called, cores control. So it gives you all the options. I mean, like you have in a browser, but it helps work through a lot of those issues when you're bundling up a web view into an app. It gives you that free access to your API. So quick note about that. All right, let's see. And then the last piece I want to mention here is Stencil.js. That's a little compiler library tool that they use to build, number two, all their components. Those are all web components. They're publishers' web components. They used to have Angular components, and then they started building out some React, and then they just backed off and they said, we're going to build web components, and you use the same components in any of the different libraries. And then each of those supported libraries, they have other, they've also written some other support for routing, and like I mentioned, the animations on routing. So if you use their tools, then you get that extra stuff. But Stencil, it's available as a toolkit, and I know Corey has used it. He's built some of his apps right here. Is that what the main tool that you build your budgeting app in?
Yep.
Stencil, yeah. So building, and what do you use for routing and that kind of stuff? Just real quick, because I know it's
Ion router. So
okay.
It's also a web component.
Yeah. So Stencil, it's available out there. It's kind of like Lit, if you've heard of the Lit library. It's you write some code, and then it'll compile it into a web component for you that can be consumed by any browser. You can drop it on any page. Okay. Shift gears a little bit. I'm just going to go quickly through this. Ionic 7. It's due to come out. Yesterday, RC4 came out. I updated the slide. But it's got some cool changes. It's kind of an incremental release, not a lot of huge stuff, but I mean they have increased the number of inline overlay components so that so here's their announcement right here. Let me go up to the inlay components. So if you're creating a page and you're writing it out and you have a little prompt you want to do, an alert or something like that, a modal, and it's just real small, you want to include it right there in the code so that you have easy interaction with your code, the JS or TypeScript part of your code. Then you can drop those widgets in here. It used to be you had to do it in JavaScript or TypeScript separately. You create a new modal and you define it, and then you present it and all that. And a lot of times you would actually do a separate component that was the modal, and then you'd say use this component and present it. And anyways, it's been really popular where they've inlined several of those components, and they're the overlay components, like these examples right here. Action sheets, they pop up from the bottom. Alerts, loading speed. You always need loading spinners. Pickers and toast. So those are all available to just put right in the middle of your page. And by default, they don't show up until they usually have a Boolean on them to present them, or you tie it to a button with an ID and you click and it pops up. So you're able to lay it out right in the page where you need it. And again, I'm always thinking single purpose. If that starts growing, if it's more than just a really small modal or alert you're popping up, move it to a separate component and present it. Do it, break it off separately. That's me talking. But so that's this is one example right here. So they have a button here, and they just put an ID on it, and then the Ion loading now has a trigger. So if you click on that button, they're automatically linked, and it displays the loading message, and that's customizable, the loading message. That's one example. Event emissions, they've streamlined things following more common standards for the events that come off of changed inputs and things like that. Simplified form control syntax. Now this before and after here. Ion item is a very highly used component in Ionic, and it's because mobile. It's typically things are just laid vertically, right? Vertically. Things just go and you scroll and scroll. Well, each row is an item, so you drop an item in, and you can put a card in it. And you can put about anything into it, and it helps lay out really nicely for mobile. So that's how they've originally done inputs, is where you have ion item, ion label, ion input placeholder, helper text. Now they've simplified that with attributes. So that's some changes that are coming in 7. And if you want to play around with Ionic 7, you've got to explicitly go in and update. You add Ionic Core at next. That's the version that you install instead of just regular Ionic. What's the Ionic? NPM packages use latest. Yeah, that's what I was trying to think. Latest is what you usually get and what you want. But if you want to play with Ionic 7, use next. And we'll look into a Ionic 7 project in a few minutes. Let's see, 6:30. Yeah. Speed through some of this. Improve Vite compatibility. Slides removal. And now they've had a component called Ion Slides, Ion Virtual Scroll, and where they were writing all that code and maintaining it, and it was very similar to third-party packages you could add to your project. And so they decided, let's just pull that out, and and then they tell you how to migrate. Like to use Swiper JS for slides. Slides is when you're going through a tutorial, when you first launch an app, or carousels and those kind of things. That's the slides. Virtual scrolls, where you have 1,000 items, but if you load all 1,000, everything's slow. So you use a virtual scroll and it automatically manages loading them into the DOM, just 20 at a time or something. So that's pretty slick for performance. And then there's links to migrating, how to migrate your projects to 7. They have great docs on that. I did a couple small ones just for fun. So that's Ionic 7. So current version released is Ionic 6, and they're up to like 6.6 or something like that. I can't remember what it was. They just they have releases at least every month, it seems like, with minor improvements and bug fixes and good stuff. So the release date for Ionic 7. You ready for this? How many of you have seen Mike Hardington do his? He's an Ionic guy. People ask him all the time, when's it coming out? When are you going to release? He always says, soon, TM. So it's really imminent. I mean, it's coming. We're on RC4. That's the beta. It's coming real soon. They won't ever commit to a date. All right, let's dive in to the third quick part of my presentation. All right, so Ionic, Vue, and Vite. So if you go to Ionic, like we showed earlier, you go to the command line, you can type Ionic start, choose Vue, and you'll come out with a nice project. It's ready to roll and everything. It's built on a couple of technologies, the Vue command line, and it uses Webpack and some other moving parts there. But Vite is a alternative. Vite plus it has roll-up internally, so it's an alternative to Webpack and the Vue command line. They don't support it officially, so if you ever you can't create a project with the Ionic command line and get Vite out of the box with Vue. But there's several tutorials on the web on how to do that. But first, why would you do it? Okay, this is the sample that I did right here. I had a 3 megabyte project and recompiled it down to 413K. So with Vite and Rollup, it's just tree shakes and just gets rid of all the unused code, and it's just amazing. And it just has a smaller runtime as well. Vite is built by the same people that build Vue, and somehow they're able to get in and trim the runtime for Vue even down further. Fewer package dependencies to maintain. I noticed my package JSON. Initially, it cut it down at least in half. And then the project I'm going to show you, I've started adding things into it. So it's starting to grow a little bit. Things like PWA and the asset generator and some of those other things. So it's starting to grow back again, but those would have also been added to the other project. And the fewer dependencies you have in your package JSON, it's fewer working parts, fewer updates you got to do down the line. It's less work to maintain your app. It's always best if you can avoid loading a package to do something, especially if it's a big package and you just want one little part of it. Try to find a better way to do it, a smaller way. You want to keep your dependencies down. And let's see. Oh, and it's fast. I mean, when you run the dev command and it pops it up, it's so fast. And any changes you make, boom, hot reloaded immediately. And I mean, all of them, all the tools do that, but Vite is just so much faster. Okay, so how do you do it? People have different opinions about it. You all come to the same end, but you can create a Vite project and then add Ionic to it. It's pretty easy. And Ionic has instructions on how to add Ionic to any project. So Aaron Saunders has a blog and video about that on YouTube. And then there's you can migrate an Ionic project to Vite. And I watched someone else's tutorial, and I give credit in the write-up. Let's see if I have it right here, but there's several steps you got to do to just clean out all those old dependencies and I brought in TypeScript and so do it either way. But the best way to start Ionic Vue Vite project is to grab a starter that's already got it all set up for you. And out on GitHub, there's a lot of projects you can go grab and fork and start your own project, and it's great to have that. And I've got a couple available we'll look at. I wanted to show you. Let me see. Actually, there's a guy named Sadesh in India, and he created this site called CodePen+Ionic.com. And he's been working on Ionic projects for a couple of years. And he's like, I just want a repo somewhere because I'm redoing the same screens and I don't want to have to go dig into my projects, find it in the code. So he built this site to be a repo of components. So you can go out here and say, I need some sliders, I need widgets, I need a whole screen, lists. And he's got these sample lists. You're like, oh, I like this one. So you can just grab it. And he's got Angular and React on here. And I've been writing him for the last month and a half. I found this about a month and a half ago. And because I've been working in Vue so much, I offered to him, I'll create all the Vue versions, and you can take them and put them into your app, or give me access, and I'll create the Vue tab. If you see here, I should zoom in a little bit. Got the sample screenshot on the left, and then it's got Angular with HTML and CSS, and then React with its TSX and CSS. So coming soon, he'll have a Vue tab right there. But until then, I have a public repo you can go get them from, and I've got linked to it. But it's called Ionic Vue Components.web.app. If you know anything about Firebase, you'll recognize that. It's a free host and a Firebase project. So all I have to do is just deploy it up to Firebase, and so this is running on the web. Yeah, Tim.
So we bundle this and put it out on the native apps, Android or on the store. Are you actually bundling up all the web components, or kind of engine and still going grabbing the web components off together?
It's all bundled.
So if you are doing multi-language, then you're going to build that an app for each language, for each geo that you're delivering to, or can you have resources
Yeah, you can. A lot of internationalization is done with a folder structure. We have a language and dictionaries in each one, and then dynamically it lets you switch languages, or it detects it from your device and uses that language. So it's better to just bundle it all in there, even with languages. But yeah, I mean, you could also, if you have needs, if you're going to put it in, I don't know, some app store, the Google App Store for the UK or something, then maybe you do want to do a separate build and put it in that app store.
Well, certain things you may have, like say they have an image, like a picture of the city or something.
Yeah.
You can keep that and load that based off of GS. It's not so
Uh-huh.
fast building up, on the resources.
Yeah.
You can also change that based off of the season and climate and stuff, so you can have some dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah, and we haven't touched on it because I'm keeping a high level today, but there's a way to deploy an app to the App Store and manually push new assets, new pages, new pictures, new whatever. As long as your permissions don't change, then you don't have to rebuild and resubmit to the App Store, and you can actually push that. Now, to use that, it's a paid feature, Ionic. See, everything we talked about so far is free, open source. You can build apps and deploy it. There's no restriction there. But they have a bunch of paid services like build pipelines and code push, or they call it something else, live app. Well, app flow is the whole package. But yeah. Okay. So I've got all the same components that Sadesh created on his site. I've just put them here. So you can go to modals. That's a bad example, but you can go to inputs here. You can view all. You can see he's got those forms, and I converted them over. And these are all running working examples. His are screenshots on his website. These are running working examples. And so to grab the components to it, you just here on the main screen, I've got links right here at the top. There's the GitHub repo where this is. Here's his site. Here's his GitHub. But also, if you noticed, you see that copy button? I can come in here and I can say, ooh, I want this course list. Boom, copy, component copy to the clipboard, and then you can go paste it in your editor. And so it's ready to go. And Vue, if you don't know much about Vue, it typically, the preferred recommendation is you put your script, your template, and your CSS all in one file. So what I just copied, I mean, if we look at that, well, we'll look at another example of it. We'll look at Vue component in a minute, but it has all three blocks, and they're all optional. So if you don't need any special styling, you just omit the style section. So I need to wrap up. I'm to my half hour, a little bit over. So let's see. Here's the links to everything that I mentioned. So you get that. Any final questions about Ionic? And I mean, again, this is just a high level. We haven't done any hands-on. I haven't done any demos. But are you okay if I take like 3 or 4 more minutes before I jump over to you? And this is what I recommend doing. If you're going to build it, if you want to try with the Vue, if you want to try coming. Yeah, I'm going to jump through everything. All the different ways to get right here. So here you can go out to the repos, and you can grab, if you want to start with the tab starter, you can come out to my repo, grab it, and I've flagged it as a template. So I can say, hey, I want to use this template to create a new repo. Sorry, let me zoom in. So I'm going to call this new one, let's do March meetup. Okay, and I'm going to skip the description. March, Ionic, Utah, meetup. All right, it's going to be public. Include all branches. No, I just want the main branch. So you can do this and get up and running. It creates your project in your own GitHub account when you do that. And then once you have it, here, boom, it's done, ready. click on code, and I can come in here and open with GitHub Desktop. That's a tool I love to use. Boom, pops up and says, where do you want to put it? Sorry, let me zoom in. That's where it is out there. I'm going to put it in Projects Ionic March Meetup. So that's good. Okay, March Meetup. So we're up and running. And then now this says, oh, you want to open it in Visual Studio Code? I'm like, yeah, thanks. It makes it easy. I'm going to jump out here to Visual Studio. Let's see what this looks like. All right, I'm going to load the command line here, the terminal down in the bottom. Again, sorry, it's really small, but first I got to do, and I've kind of switched over on this machine. I'm using PNPM, but just you do the same thing with NPM. I'm just going to do an install. Got to get all my dependencies. And should be pretty fast because PNPM caches stuff, and I've already done this in preparation for the demo. So boom, there it is. It shows you what all it installed. And now the commands, I can do an Ionic serve. In fact, let's just do that because that's the Ionic serve. If you look in the package JSON, if you know about web projects, these are the commands that are available. So I could do an npm run dev, and Vite is the compiler that launches it. And I'm going to do an Ionic serve, but it's actually going to, because I've got it defined here in the middle, Ionic serve, it's going to know to use Vite, and because usually with Vue projects, Ionic uses the Vue CLI, but because I've created that alias there, anyways, if I run Ionic serve, Vite dev, boom, pop up and running. I'm going to go into developer mode here. I'll zoom in a little bit. You zoom in on this side. You can see it. Again, this is coming up in material design. If I want to go to, if I want to switch to an iPhone, then I have to do a reload, re-render it, and we get, let's see. No, it's being slow here. Let me shrink that back. If I can see, it is doing iPhone Pro, and we have empty cache, hard reload. It's the demo jinx. Yeah, usually refreshes immediately, and we could see the Apple. It's still. Oh, maybe I took out the. Yep. Maybe that is the Apple. Let me see. Turn that off. Reload. That's definitely material. Doesn't look like it's switching. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm hitting that. Nothing's happening. About blank. What's going on there? That back here, it's running. It says, okay, I'm going to click on that, load it in a whole new tab, and reload. What is wrong with that other tab? I don't know. I'm closing it. So this is the Apple guidelines. And yeah, so this is up and running. I can go and change. I put a list in here just so we could see. Apple has this funky thing that came out a year or two ago, and they said, oh, we want this big, nice, fat header. But then if you have to scroll, we want it to go reduce down to a normal header. So Ionic did that magic for you. So that's why I want to show you the Apple version. So if I switch back and we go, it goes to material mode. It just has a standard header like you're used to. So there's that. And then if I go into my code and pull this up, I've got my source, my components, my views. Let me see. Here's tab 1. And you'll see that I have this ion list with a for loop 25, just printing out the number. So that's an ion list of ion items. That's what we got going right here. So if I go and change that, do anything to it here. Oh, and I mentioned Apple has 2 headers. They have the big header, and then they have the normal one. So every component, there's a header in the page, and then there's another header in the content. This is for Apple only. So that's why you'll see two headers in there. It's their fancy scrolly thing. But yeah, other than that, we can come in here and we can drop anything in here. Ion button. Oh man, that's a little bit too much.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So Ion just knows to ignore whichever one you're not using that.
Yeah, when it's material, that second one is always hidden. And when you're in Apple, if your page doesn't have much on it, you'll only see the big header all the time. As soon as it starts to scroll, then it does that for you. Ionic does that to follow the Apple guidelines. So Ion button, I'm gonna make this full screen just to color primary, and what's the fill equals outline, and we're gonna say click me. I'm just gonna do a real quick one. Now you'll notice Ion button is green. The other Ion widgets are red. That means it's not imported. So we just come down to our import statement and add Ion button. And we switch over to our screen. Oh, way down here at the bottom, there's the click me button. So again, that's all I want to do high level today. This is the structure of the Vue. It's the same structure as the Vue CLI version. The only difference is the package JSON. It's using different build tools and even different test tools. It's got Vite test in it, and so yeah.
So I've never built anything with Vue. So your imports always go at the bottom? Right?
You can put them anywhere you want. The traditional old way to do it is template, script, style. But now they're kind of recommending script first, and then template, and then style.
And so if you didn't include that Ion button, would it like fail to compile? Or would it happen?
No, it'll just give you warnings. It'll give you warnings. I think it'll actually work. So something else I want to show you this. If you get into Vue, you'll notice I'm using the setup script. So this is there's a lot of boilerplate extra stuff you do normally in a Vue component with you have a setup function and you have to return a bunch of stuff, and this one line of imports would become like 10, 12 lines the old way. But I'm using setup script, and it just says make all these things I'm importing available in the template and in the code. And so it's a lot quicker, shorter. And then there's options for, I'll do style real quick, and then I'll turn it over to Corey. And we want to do lang equals SCSS. This project also has the Sass compiler as one of the dependencies, so that you can do lang SCSS. And scoped is what you want to do by default. Angular does that for you automatically. It just means any styles that's linked to this component, usually in a separate file for Angular, I don't want it to bleed into my whole site. It is just going to work in this component. So these are component styles. So you can do something with I don't know, do something like I've got my Copilot running. I don't know what all that is. That's not going to give us much, but let's see what it did to our no. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and so Vite is telling us we still got another issue. What did I do? What does it say? Click outside. Yes. Oh, did I? No, it's SCSS. Or is it Sass here? It's Sass here. Sorry. It's used interchangeably in a lot of places, but not here. So where am I wrong? Button. All right, but anyways, that's how you set up, and I'm sure it is SCSS. And look at, you get the highlighting back in there. What did you say?
That's valid CSS too. So
yeah, it's valid CSS. So I'm not sure. Let's restart our build tool down here. Quit. It all depends on your needs. It will do. You can publish to a website, publish to a PWA on the web. You can also use the same code to package for Android and iOS. So yeah, it's whatever you're wanting to build, it will help you along the way.
So a lot of ways, it's kind of, it's kind of like it and Flutter are trying to do the same thing from just different perspectives.
Yeah. So Flutter, you have to learn Dart, and that's one of their things. They say, it's like, if you know web, if you know Vue or Angular or React, you can come in and hit the ground running. You don't have to go learn Dart and the Flutter ecosystem. And then you got to learn some Ionic stuff. You got to learn the command line, the capacitor and stuff. But
But it is web first, right? Where Flutter is like native first.
okay, I'm turning
If you
off.
were to build a web app through Flutter, you'd get weird it's weird web stuff right now.
Yeah. They have their components that it maps to or something that it actually builds. Yeah. So it's similar market, cross compatibility, cross platform, like React Native too. But they all work so differently. This is all web, very web centered. And the issue I had was this project, I haven't added the SCSS processor to the project, so it's not building it. I had to take that out, and SCSS, it just lets you nest and do a whole bunch of things. But all right, so that's all I've got. Again, all the links are on the slides. I posted a link to in the meetup chat for tonight. Any other questions? I turn it over to Corey. Yeah, Brett.
From your experience with Angular, React, and Vue,
Mhm.
now you switch to Vue. So when you mentioned like speed and stuff, are you getting better performance out of an Ionic app written in Vue versus Angular or React, or are they all the same?
They're all pretty comparable. They're all, you just edge stuff. So I wouldn't worry about that. But as I mentioned in the title, DX, the developer experience, for me, I feel like when I'm writing in Vue, I feel like I'm closer to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, TypeScript. I feel like I'm closer to that instead of annotating and wrapping all my things and doing so much extra craft. I can just import stuff. I don't know, the scripts and everything in here. I mean, this is a full-on script area, so I can write a handler, on click here, console log clicked, and then up here in my button, I just do, and in Vue you do an at click instead of a hard brackets or something. On click, right? So I don't know if I come down here and click on this button. Yeah, we get our clicked. You can't even see it, so tiny. But yeah, I just feel like it's closer to original web website creation. But yeah, anything else? And for those that came in late, I mean, we've got dinners back here. I see 5 salads and 2 other entrees still sitting there. So help yourself to that. And I'm going to turn time over to Corey. And got your slides here.
Thanks, Todd.
That actually ties right into what I wanted to talk about. CodePen. Has anybody heard of CodePen before? I got some thumbs up, hands up. Awesome. CodePen is basically a web view to build quick HTML, CSS, JavaScript prototypes. So just like you said, you like coding in Vue because it's really close to that. That's like exactly what CodePen is, and that's why I like CodePen. A little bit about me. One goal, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, is a finance app that I'm building and trying to build the business app. Table Needs, I worked there full-time all last year, and now I'm there part-time this year as I'm trying to get this business off the ground. Our Tributes is another app that I'm building on the side that lets you scan a little QR code and learn about somebody that passed on. It's just a web app, but both these ones are iOS, Android, and web for one goal and table needs, or sorry, table needs is on Android, but only for like one partner. And then I used to work at Swirkit. If you've heard of Swirkit, when the Ionic stuff, they're always talking about Swirkit because it's one of the big apps that's been around since Ionic V1. But I worked for them for 4 years. Same thing, iOS, Android, web, all one code base, built in Ionic and Stencil.js. And then another one, Phases Card Game, is an app that I built for my father-in-law who made this game. And it's just an Ionic Angular. That was years ago. So it's still running on the web, but I haven't really touched it in a while. So I've been around using Ionic for a long time and love it. And I'll keep using it because it's awesome. Why prototyping in CodePen? Just like Todd said, like it's very minimal, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So if you know those 3 things, you can build out views really quickly. You're obviously not going to ship an app through here, but it's really helpful for proof of concept, right? If you need to quickly put something together with little overhead without having to set up a dev environment or even download code onto your computer. It's super helpful for bug reporting. So if you ever find a bug or you think there's a bug in Ionic, if you can reproduce it in a CodePen or in another environment like CodePen, then it's really easy for some other developer to pick it up and solve the problem, right? If you can reproduce it. The other thing that I really like about it is teaching kids to code. So I've taught my nephews, jump into CodePen together. We all send a link, and then they can like instantly get their hands dirty in a very quick HTML, CSS, and JavaScript world that is not as intimidating as downloading a full project on your computer. I presented something years ago at an Angular conference with kids that were, I want to say like 6 to 12, and all of them were able to jump into a CodePen and like get all excited and geek out over building an Ionic view. And like it's really exciting doing those simple things. And also, I guess I said that twice, testing a bug in Ionic, right? Great alternatives are things like StackBlitz, right? If you go into Ionic, they have this little button here that in every one of their little demos, in fact, I'm going to pull this up to show you. I can still see this, yep. If Todd showed this earlier, is that like, here's the Ionic docs, and on the left, you see different components that are available. And each of them have examples in Angular, JavaScript, React, and Vue. And if you click on one of these versions, you can click on this open in StackBlitz, and it'll open it up as an already running project with that project running. Give it just a second. But this is, you can tell like this is full like IDE kind of stuff, right? You see folders and files, and you get multiple TypeScript or JavaScript files and CSS and a package JSON. So I wouldn't put this in front of my 11-year-old son or like my nephews, right? And for me, that little overhead of launching something, not super necessary if I'm just trying to throw together a quick prototype. This is still an awesome alternative. Great way to like throw together a prototype or validate something or copy and paste Angular or Vue code. But I've mentioned that because that's what Ionic shows you, and it's in the docs everywhere. But I'm presenting on CodePen just because it's simpler. So here's some examples. Putting together a proof of concept. So trying out new Ionic features. For example, like the Ion titles. So here's a CodePen that has, this is actually a pretty complex one, but it's still fun to see these kind of examples where if I click on a page, you'll see this transition where my title, page 1, morphs into the back button, right? And if I hit page 3, it morphs into the back button, right? And so this is again, an Ionic thing that comes free because you've built it using Ionic, but it's nice to see a very simple example of this thing working. And then you can try these different methods out. Sometimes for a proof of concept, it doesn't work, but I don't want to go into building this locally. So I'll just try it out in a CodePen. For example, I want to say about a month ago, we were trying to see if we could put an Ion split pane inside of a modal, because that's how our app is built at Table Needs. We use a lot of modals. So I tried it, and it doesn't work. So basically, you can't really have a menu inside of a modal because the menu, I'm not sure why, but it didn't work. So that also helps you invalidate things that don't work with Ionic, because a menu should be at like the root level, and you're trying to like open it from the side versus being inside of a smaller container. At Swirkit, we had this this virtual scroll where you could look at an exercise list, and our exercise list consisted of like 300 exercises. Sorry, I'm realizing I should probably zoom in on this. And so we were having some issues with our filtering. So like if I filtered down to only show me exercises that worked my legs, I'd come back and my virtual scroll would be weird. And so I was like, okay, is this a bug with my implementation or is this a bug with Ionic? And so I put together a quick prototype that just had, a split pane and a virtual scroll. Oh, that's why I wasn't scrolling before. Todd's not inverted, so I was confused. I was scrolling the wrong way. So here's me scrolling through 1,000 items, right? So the virtual scroll works fine. And then if I go to filter it, and in this filter, I just, if you see what I'm doing here, it's basically just taking the items. Where's my filter code? It's probably past the modal. If I filter it, I'm basically taking, there it is. I'm taking every 7th item. So I'm saying, okay, filter out everything that's not divisible by 7. So if I hit this filter button, you'll notice that this still works, and it filters really fast back and forth with this virtual scroll. So, and then I tried the same thing inside of a modal because our filter was inside of a modal. So I was like, okay, let's see if this thing works inside of a modal. And because I'm in CodePen, it might take a second to load. But inside a modal, also, this still works, right? There's my 714, there's my 1. So I knew that the bug that I had was my implementation and not in Ionic, because like with vanilla JS, like I was able to do the thing and not have any problems. Another one was we wanted to be able to hide our search bar while we were scrolling. So the search bar is across the top, and if you have a big old long list of items as you scroll and you're trying to find something, you might want to you want to use this real estate since they obviously don't want to search. So as you scrolled, this would hide the scroll hide the search bar as you scroll down. And then you can see this on iOS mode as well. If I put like mode equals iOS. Oh. But again, I would have to do that on the HTML level. So there's your iOS search bar, right? Your title center aligned. And so I was able to prototype this concept and see what it felt like. And it felt a little weird. I don't know if you can tell, but like as I scroll a little bit, that thing starts hiding a little early. Like in the perfect world, I'd get it to scroll away as it would never hide the 1, if that makes sense. Right? So it was a little weird there. Can't remember if we actually ended up shipping this. But there was, again, another proof of concept that I just wanted to test without having to run an environment and just put it together in vanilla JS, HTML, and CSS. So that's one reason to do this. Another one is bug reporting. So here's a bug that we have at Table Needs, where we had this Ion label that was next to an input that had, customer email address required, right? This is where this gift card code was going to get emailed to. So we wanted to have this label, but it has a lot of text, as you can tell, and it overflowed weird, and it was in a label that floats. So I was like, okay, let's see if this is that, because I know we have a bunch of custom CSS in our code base, and so I wanted to see if it was because of our code or if it was an Ionic issue. And so this was me putting together this little prototype to just say, okay, here's what this, and here's how these look. This is a floating label that as you scroll down, like it's just going to overflow unless you have a helper class that's Ion text wrap. But because the text is wrapping, it's still like it still is a weird bug, right? Like the text will run right into my label there. And so because I'm able to reproduce this in Ionic, I also found a little workaround and created this new class that's like, custom. Like I'm fixing the Ionic the Ionic bugs so that I can like basically put in a pull request and say, hey, can we fix this issue? And now labels, if they are really long, even though that might be a bad practice, like it can still work. And whether it's wide or short, like this thing will always work even with an input, right? And if I go even smaller, like still this will push down, won't ever overlap the label, where this one, the label's like, you know, getting overridden. Another use case that we've used Ionic and CodePen for is just vanilla like feature design. So at Swirkit, we had a team that was working on our admin app. This is where we would like basically generate a whole bunch of permission codes for people that could have access to Swirkit. And so, you know, you'd have an organization and how many people were active, and then there'd be a change in, you know, activity. And because this was managed by a fully separate team, like and this developer was not didn't like CSS, didn't care for it as much as I do. So I was like, well, let me just throw together a quick CodePen for you. And then she was able to pick it up and just basically copy and paste everything I did and put it into the template so that it actually rendered real code, right? And so again, I'm using here an Ion, just an item with some detail. Apparently I copied some weird stuff there. And it's all obviously just hard coded, right? What the values are. But then I added, you know, like 20 lines of CSS. Yeah, 23 lines of CSS to get these nice little like increase, decrease, or, you know, no change kind of options. So I'm kind of a designer centric guy. So I like to create these little prototypes if someone else is going to implement the design so that it does follow a standard that we're using. And then the example I showed before, or I was talking about before, like creating a CodePen for kids. This is like basic. If it's not this, it's something really close. Is what we demoed at NGConf a couple years ago, where basically we dropped in this Ion tabs, you know, and the kids could come in here and say, here's my family, here's my hobbies, here's, you know, about me, and they could create this nice little Ion tabs app all within HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I didn't even touch the CSS, right? So there's only HTML in here because Ionic is web components. And if I wanted to change this, I'd just come up to my tab family section and I'd change it, you know, to be, you know, Corey. And then I also went and took them to, like Todd showed, if I go to Ionicons, I can search for a new icon. Maybe my family likes fire. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to use this bonfire icon. And here I can copy that HTML Ion icon, and I can come back to my demo and I can go down to this tab and say, instead of the icon of body, right, I'm going to use icon bonfire for my family, right? And then I'd get that icon there. And obviously, if you can imagine 8-year-olds creating their own little icons and their own apps, like they geek out about this stuff. They're like, oh, that's so cool. And they get really excited about finding little nuggets and then creating their own version of it, right? And it's really fun because you can teach them to look to documentation when really it's them getting excited about documentation, which you don't normally get excited about, right? But Ionic is very UI friendly. It's exciting to look at the components. So for, again, young and old, at least I get excited looking at the Ionic docs, maybe because I'm a nerd, but alrighty. So now I've given you all the whys. Now here's the how-to. So feel free to open up CodePen, follow along. It's like 3 steps. So you really can do this right now if you want to. If you go to Ionic Framework Docs /intro/CDN, there is a section right here that's called Ionic Framework CDN. And if you look at these script tags, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see what's going on. And this, again, Todd talked about this, but I think this is kind of where the rubber hits the road if you want to fully understand what's going on. We're loading it's really just one line of JavaScript, but it's 2 because one's a module version, one's a no module version, depending on the browser support. But you're basically loading up the Ionic core JavaScript, which basically, as soon as you add the JavaScript there, you're able to use all these web components in the page. That's why in my CodePens, you can actually use Ionic. And then you also load the style sheet, which is some CSS class helpers. It also comes with some default styles for your colors and things like that. So just copy this section. You'll then go into the CodePen, I will show, I guess I could go into this one. If you go into your settings, there's an HTML section and you're just going to paste it right here. And that's all you need to do. You're pasting the JavaScript that you're going to download and the CSS that also you're going to download from Ionic. So that is like one little caveat, is that like when you'll notice when I load this, sometimes it can take a second on the initial load. That's because it's fetching those JavaScript files, right? And if I change those files, it'll take a second to load the first time. But like, as I'm changing things, like it is a pretty fast reload because you're just changing this. You're not having to refetch those JavaScript files. So for example, Todd already touched on this one as well, but here's how I'm going to, let me go back to this as well. I wanted to read this note. So the Ionic docs that I just showed you, they'll tell you to copy this URL. And if you notice, you're going npm Ionic core dist, and it's basically has no version in it. And that's because this link, if you're ever using something like JS Deliver, it's always going to go to the latest version that's production, that's stable. What I like to do if I'm creating a CodePen is I like to lock it to a version. And sometimes I'll do this to like check if this version is broken, this version is fixed. I'll do the same thing. So you can easily change that by just saying Ionic /core. You'll notice down here, if I can zoom in, I probably can't, but it's right here, Ionic core app 7.0.0-RC3. Maybe I should change it to RC4 now that RC4 is out. But this is super helpful if you're ever debugging something and you've reported a bug to Ionic and they say, hey, it's fixed in this version. You could go directly to your CodePen, paste the new URL with the new version, RC4, and be like, yep, it's fixed. Awesome. And then you can, report back on a GitHub comment or something. Okay, so last slide. So now if I go into this CodePen, all I've done is I've come in here and I've said, I've pasted these. You notice my core 7.7.0. We're going to change this to RC4 just because we can. Change this one to RC4 and change this one to RC4. And then we can, I think I might have copied the wrong URL. Did I put it on a different page? Maybe it's on this page. I might have to follow it, find a different one, because I created one just for Ionic 7 that I was going to show some new Ionic 7 things.
The third to last tab there.
What is it? Yeah, but that one's a pretty complicated one. There's one that's just give me 1 minute. Ionic V7. Basic, that's the one I wanted right there. So this one, all I've done is I've created, again, pasted that code. This one, I guess I should change to RC4. This is one we're going to mess around in for, 2 minutes. Then now I'm on the latest version. And then, so Todd mentioned this earlier, but here's an example of those Ion inputs in the old version. So here's prior to V7, you would have an Ion item that you'd put a fill on it that had an outline. You'd then have to put an Ion label with the email in it. And then you'd have an Ion input with its value. And then you'd have any kind of helper text, like, this one's saying you need to enter a valid email address. And now in V7, if you just scroll up a little bit here, this is the new input that you can put a label directly on and a placeholder. So there's just a lot less boilerplate here. CodePen likes to format these all in one line since it's a single component. So your Ion input becomes really, really small, right? That's all I need instead of basically 4 web components, right? I need an Ion item, a label, an input, and a div for that helper slot. And now I can do that all in one single Ion input. line. And they render the same, right? Like if you're looking at these, you couldn't tell the difference if you're just looking at them. But one's got 4 DOM elements and one's one web component, right? Under the hood, they might be rendering the same thing, but a lot less boilerplate as you're building it out. So I hope that's kind of helpful understanding, because Ionic's built with web components, we can do these types of prototypes. All we got to do is load the JavaScript, and the web components are then available on the page, and you can tweak and customize. You know, if I wanted to do some custom CSS here, in fact, I can come in here and we can look up the Ionic color generator, and I can change my primary color to be something gross, right? I can change these other colors. Maybe it's a darker color. And they'll spit out, here's my CSS variables that'll basically override whatever's already in there. So for me, you can tell really the only primary color you're going to see here is the active tab here at the bottom. But if I paste this custom CSS, then now my active tab is going to be this green color. And again, me being excited about teaching kids this, like they can go create their own colors, copy those colors, paste them in here, and in a 30-minute class, a bunch of 10-year-olds can have a bunch of different apps that look very different from each other because they followed some documentation and they've been able to customize icons, colors, and components. So any questions, thoughts? Yeah.
So if you were trying to test out like an Angular app or something, just a component within it, could you throw the Angular code in there, the TypeScript?
Not in CodePen. Angular is written in TypeScript, so they don't, not that I know of, they don't think that they support TypeScript. If you wanted to do an Angular one, I would say go to the Ionic docs and click on Angular, and then you can hit open in StackBlitz. Yeah, because it'll be TypeScript. You'll notice it has your app.module. It'll have your component CSS, your HTML, right? They're all separate the Angular way. But the nice thing about this is that if you do build something like this, or maybe your designer has a little bit of coding and he put together this prototype, you could still copy this HTML, at least in Angular, and paste it in your StackBlitz or in your local environment, and you just have to change your variables, right? Because you're going to have dynamic data, not hard-coded data. So, question though. Any other questions? This is my shameless plug. If you're looking for a finance app, check out OneGoal. I'll answer your support questions. So yeah, iOS, Android, and web, if you're interested. Any other questions about it?
So you prefer Stencil over Angular, Vue, React?
I still build with Stencil. Yeah. React, I'm getting more and more familiar with React, but there's so many like nuances with React and hooks and stuff like that I prefer sticking in a mostly Stencil world where I'm just rendering HTML elements, and then it's got its own state management, but it's more intuitive to me. I think like for Todd, the Vue DX is like right up his alley. For me, maybe I'm just training myself this way, but the Stencil DX for me is like prime. I really like it.
Does it support TypeScript, or is it just JavaScript?
Yeah, it's TypeScript. Yeah, it's kind of like if you thought of Angular and React combined, that's what it looks like, because you have decorators that represent state variables, and then you have a render function that returns DOM. So where Angular, you have a separate HTML file that sometimes can get misaligned with your TypeScript, right?
Yeah.
And you don't know that until you're shipping it. And that's something I love about React and Stencil, is that if I change a variable in my TypeScript in Stencil, like my render function will have a big red underline under it. It'll fail to compile. Like I can't break it, right? Because their files are right there. Anything else?
Once you create the prototype, how easy is it to besides just copy and pasting, isn't there like an export feature or something that'll zip up the assets and you can drop them into the project or something? Or is it, are you
For
in
CodePen? CodePen, you don't do that. I would just copy it, right? Because there's only 3 separate files. Yeah, I don't think you export stuff from here.
So no, Stackwoods, I think, integrates with GitHub.
Oh, there's an export button right there, but it's probably just going to download everything at once, right?
Everything at once.
So typically I'll share the link, right? Like these links, I'm not signed in with my account, so any of you guys could look at this and you could fork it and like create your own and save it, and it's all in the cloud. So yeah, typically if I'm handing it to someone else, I'll actually just send them the link and let them copy and paste the HTML and CSS. So yeah. All righty. That's all I got. That's you, Tom.
Okay, half hour until we're supposed to clear out of here. So if you want to hang around, some of us will stay and help you if you want to slap a project together and get some questions answered on it. Otherwise, we're done. You can grab some more drinks and
So Todd,
yeah.
next month, is it the same time? Is it
Yeah, next month. I just created the meetup event. So yeah, it's the 4th Tuesday at 6 o'clock again. And I'm thinking about doing the code nights too. It's harder now because I used to drive up here 3 days a week, go to work, and now I'm working full time from home, and that's pacing. So it was fun. We used to do code nights where we just get together like at JCW's. They have pretty good Wi-Fi there, and you just bring your laptops, grab a burger, fries, or a shake or something, and we just sit there around the tables and just, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm doing, how do you do this, and real informal code night. So that's an option too. But yeah, the next formal meetup is in 4 weeks.
Which will be kind of cool. Tyler Slater is the guy that's presenting. He's
Mhm.
built with React Native before and is now building stuff in Ionic. So it'll be interesting to hear his comparison, what he likes about each platform or each
Yeah.
method, right?
All right. Yeah. Let's see, we're streaming. Say goodbye, YouTube. End that stream.